When the House voted today to extend the Bush tax rates for lower and middle-income Americans, 3 Republicans broke away from the pack and dared to side with the Democrats in support of the bill. Congressman Steve King was not one of them. He has slavishly stayed on Republican message, demanding the Bush tax rates be continued for everyone, including the wealthy. Joining me now from Washington, Iowa Congressman Steve King. Congressman King, is this the first tax cut that you've voted against?
Well, I don't know that I have voted against a tax cut. I think I would be for most all those things that would keep this economy growing and
let's get it straight.
For promoter of free enterprise.
You voted against a tax cut. You voted against a tax cut today. Let's just get that settled. You voted against a cut in every single income tax rate, going all the way down to the people who are paying 15, 10%. You voted to allow it to go up to 15 instead of going down to 10. You voted for against a tax cut in every bracket except all those people in your district in western Iowa, which must be, what, I don't know, 25 of them, who make over $250,000 a year.
I don't think anybody really believes that that vote today was against a tax cut, and it's obvious that I don't believe that, or I would have reacted differently to your question.
Well,
what I voted against was separating out and playing class envy against people that are in a higher bracket. If you don't believe it, then you don't know what the tax code is.
Hey, you voted today to allow, let's talk about the bottom bracket, okay, the bottom bracket. You voted today to allow the tax to increase from 10% to 15% for the lowest income taxpayers in this country. You voted for a 5% increase in that. What is a 50% raise for them in their tax bracket? That's what you voted for. Do you want to now pretend that you did not vote for a tax increase today?
I'm going to say this. Everybody that's paying attention to this knows that this vote today was never considered to ever get to the president's desk. It's a political vote. It wasn't ready. 20 Democrats voted no on it as well. They understood that it's a political game. My constituents understand that, and so will the thinking Americans. I'm not a bit worried about how that spin comes on. We need to hold out to get a better deal. And I'm for making all of those tax brackets in 2001 and 2003 permanent, and I'm for addressing the estate tax, too. There will be people laying on their deathbed at the end of this year, watching as midnight comes, deciding whether they're going to put their loved one on life support because we didn't address the estate tax today. And I think that's a real disservice to the American people.
Well, they are working on addressing the estate tax, apparently, in the package of compromise they're trying to negotiate in the Senate. And it is true that this vote is clearly going to come back to you. The White House indicated today that they want to continue negotiating with Republicans in the Senate to try to get a compromise version of this. What compromise version of it do you think House Republicans could support? For example, as we just discussed with Barney Frank, what if that threshold of $250,000 was raised to $1 million? Would you be willing to allow for a possible raise in the rate on incomes over $1 million a year? And in your district, do you know if anyone in your district makes over $1 million a year?
Oh, I'm confident there are those in my district that do make over $1 million a year, but I don't think I'll hear from them on that proposal. I just suggest this. Let's extend them all. I would like to make them all permanent, but let's extend them all so that there can be plannable capital investment that goes on. Why not just take all the brackets that have been good enough for the last since 01 and 03 and move them forward? I'd make them permanent, but if they put a 5-year plan out on the table for everything and we could address this estate tax, I'd take a real good look at that. And I wanted to know what some of the others in my conference thought before I would actually sign on.
I want to get to the DREAM Act with you, Congressman, because you have said, you have guessed, you have made up the idea that the DREAM Act would cost $20 billion and that the CBO was suppressing a secret report where it would cost $20 billion. The CBO has reported today that it is, in fact, a no-cost piece of legislation, which is everyone's been insisting on. This is legislation, for the audience that might not realize it, to create a path for citizenship for people people who've come into this country illegally at a very young age, if they join the military, if they've come in before the age of 16, if they go to college in this country, they could find their way to a path to citizenship at no cost. So now are you willing to admit that what you were saying about the $20 billion cost and the secret CBO report is absolutely untrue?
I said there are 4 versions of the DREAM Act out here on this Hill, and that they would narrow the definitions that they had in the language in so that they would try to get that CBO score in under the $20 billion. That was a number that was leaked out of the CBO office. And additionally, I have a $6.4 billion cost on this that came from CBO, and there's some offsetting revenue streams, but they did not charge against it the cost of the family reunification that is a necessary result or an actual result of what would happen when you see a citizenship handed over to 2.1 million people. This is dynamically scored in one version, and it shuts off the costs that expand on this and other versions of it. So it's a very, very tight definition in a bill that's tighter than the one that is the original one that came out. But what this is it provides amnesty for 2.1 million people. And that's twice as large as the estimate when Ronald Reagan signed the '86 Amnesty Act.
Well, would you call it amnesty when it provides a path to citizenship for soldiers who have volunteered and done service in combat in Iraq and Afghanistan?
No, I wouldn't call that amnesty, and we have a provision for them to earn their citizenship. We don't need the DREAM Act in order to do that.
But the Secretary Gates, Defense Secretary, does support the DREAM Act specifically because of the incentive it would give for soldiers in the military and going forward. So what does he not understand about the DREAM Act? What does the Secretary of Defense have wrong about the DREAM Act on why he thinks it is good for America and good for our military?
Well, I think what you'll see is that the Secretary of Defense, a number of the members of that come from the Pentagon, high-ranking officials that had one opinion 2 or 3 years ago, have modified their opinions because they have a different commander-in-chief. I don't take their words at exactly the face value that I did before. But what we really have here is that the 2.1 million people that would be receiving amnesty. And on top of that, here's the part about national defense that I'd like to ask Bob Gates. And that is, what do you say to the widow or the widower who has lost their husband or their wife or the child who's lost their mother and father in Afghanistan or Iraq defending our liberty, who is paying out-of-state tuition premiums while they're sitting in a desk next to somebody that's received amnesty and a de facto scholarship under this DREAM Act? It's completely unjust to do that, and no one's been able to answer that moral conundrum that would be created by the DREAM Act.
Congressman King, let me ask you what you would say to the family of Lance Corporal Jose Antonio Gutierrez. Do you know who he is?
No, I don't.
You ever heard of him? Okay.
I'm not sure.
22 years old. He was 22 years old on March 21st, 2002, when he was killed in Iraq. He was one of our first casualties in Iraq. He came to this country illegally before the age of 16 from Guatemala. He was granted, upon his death in service to this country, he was granted citizenship after he died. Is that a citizenship case that you object to?
You know, I think I do remember that case, and I'm not certain, but it seems to me that I supported a private bill to grant him posthumous citizenship and to honor him for his sacrifice to America. I have to check the records on that, but I think that's what we'll find out.
Okay, so that's when Steve King is willing to grant citizenship. If you can get yourself killed in combat for this country, then you're willing to step up and say, okay, you've earned your citizenship now that we can bury you.
I think what we have is 2.1 million people estimated to step in and receive this de facto scholarship, and you're giving me an example on the other side of this, but no one's answering how you answer to that widow or widower who would be paying out-of-state tuition, sitting in a desk next to someone who's getting a discount on theirs, who have come into the country illegally, perhaps the day before their 16th birthday, and perhaps as old as 30 years old.
Out-of-state tuition applies to people out of state. In-state tuition applies to people in-state. And there is absolutely no distinction made on DREAM Act students in that bill for that. Congressman Steve King, Republican of Iowa, thank you very much for your time tonight. I want to continue with this with you when we have more time. Thanks for coming in tonight.
Thank you.